The story I want to share doesn't need a specific time or place. What matters is its truth, and the fact that I was there to witness it all. Hannah was in her third year of medical school when she fell deeply, irreversibly in love. Her heart belonged to Jake, a classmate in a parallel group. Jake was the kind of man who turned heads effortlessly, tall, athletic, with a gaze that bore the intensity of his striking brown eyes. Hannah, on the other hand, was a vision of delicate beauty, her golden blonde hair and bright blue eyes complementing her lithe, graceful figure. Together, they seemed made for one another, a portrait of perfect harmony. Their romance blossomed rapidly, as though their hearts had been waiting their whole lives to find each other. The idea of marriage quickly took root in their conversations, but both were practical enough to agree they should finish school before tying the knot. Jake found a quaint one-bedroom apartment in town, and the two moved in together, their days filled with the joy of building a shared life. To Hannah, Jake was the center of her universe, the one and only man she could ever imagine loving. Their parents knew of the relationship, and while supportive, urged them to wait on starting a family until after graduation and marriage. They agreed, setting a wedding date for July, just before beginning their medical residencies in the fall. Hannah was lost in the bliss of young love, her mind consumed by dreams of her future. Her wedding dress was being crafted, a charming restaurant was booked for the reception, and honeymoon tickets were secured. Her days passed in a haze of anticipation, each one bringing her closer to what she believed would be the happiest moment of her life. But a week before the wedding, Hannah awoke to find Jake missing, sleep still clinging to her. She shrugged on a robe and padded into the kitchen, calling his name softly. Silence. No sign of him. She checked the bathroom. Empty. Unease began to coil in her stomach. Maybe he'd stepped out for groceries or a morning walk. But then she saw it. A small white note pinned to the fridge with a heart-shaped magnet. Her hands trembled as she pulled it free. Sitting on a stool, she unfolded the paper, her heart pounding with a strange sense of dread. The word struck her like a blow. I'm sorry, but I've fallen in love with someone else. Don't try to find me. That's life. The room blurred as tears filled her eyes. Her chest tightened, and the air felt too thick to breathe. She tried to rise but stumbled, the world tilting around her. Darkness consumed her as she hit the floor. When she awoke, it was to the sterile brightness of a hospital ceiling. The sound of her mother's voice reached her, muffled, like it came from behind a wall. Thank God you're awake, her mother said, the words trembling with relief. Hannah turned her head painfully to see her mother seated beside the bed, wearing a white hospital coat draped over her shoulders. What happened? Hannah croaked, her voice dry and cracked. Her mother leaned forward, stroking her daughter's hair. The doctor said it was a cardiac episode brought on by severe emotional distress. You've been unconscious for 2 days. Hannah's heart clenched as memories flooded back. Jake, she whispered, tears spilling from her eyes. How could he do this to me? I loved him so much. Her mother held her, offering silent comfort. But Hannah felt hollow, a void opening where her heart used to be. Hannah was discharged days later, knowing full well that her collapse had been caused by heartbreak. She resolved to distract herself, burying the pain beneath grueling hours at the hospital. As her residency began in the internal medicine department, she volunteered for every extra shift, every night call. Anything to keep her thoughts from straying to Jake. But love is a cruel master, and her feelings for him lingered like an open wound. She heard through mutual acquaintances that Jake had married another classmate, a woman whose family owned a chain of restaurants. The news cut her, but she didn't seek him out. It was too late to mend what was broken, and yet deep down, Hannah knew that if he called her, she would abandon everything to be by his side. Months turned to years, and though Hannah excelled in her career, the ghost of Jake haunted her. She continued living in the apartment they had once shared, unable to let go of the memories. The bouquet of white roses he had given her before he left still sat on the windowsill, dried and withered, yet untouched. They were a grim monument to a love that had died too soon. Loneliness enveloped her. She cut ties with friends and quarreled with family, retreating into the shell of her pain. Nights were the worst, silent and suffocating. Sometimes, she imagined Jake standing at the foot of her bed, watching her with regret. Those nights, She would bite her pillow to stifle the cries of despair that threatened to escape. One cold evening in March, consumed by the weight of her grief, Hannah made a decision. She retrieved a bottle of brandy from the kitchen and a vial of sleeping pills from her nightstand. Sitting on the edge of her bed, she swallowed the pills and chased them with the alcohol, her thoughts drifting to Jake one last time before darkness claimed her. But fate intervened. A neighbor found her unconscious and called for help. She awoke days later in the hospital, alive but shattered. As spring unfurled its gentle warmth, something shifted within Hannah. She began taking walks, first around the courtyard, then in a nearby park. Slowly, the colors of the world returned, and she saw life continuing around her. People laughed, loved, and celebrated. For the first time in years, she realized the world didn't revolve around her heartbreak. Though her love for Jake would never fully vanish, it began to lose its grip on her. And with each passing day, Hannah rediscovered pieces of herself she thought she had lost forever. Hannah's mother did her best to support her daughter through the shadows of heartbreak. Yet her encouragement often came wrapped in the urgency of tradition, urging Hannah to move forward, to think about having a family, and to avoid the fate of growing old alone. It was as if something within Hannah snapped awake. She began paying more attention to herself, eating better, dressing with a touch of flair, and working out to regain her confidence. Her renewed glow didn't go unnoticed. Hannah was young, beautiful, and a doctor, qualities that naturally drew admirers like moths to a flame. Her life was suddenly filled with fleeting glances and murmured compliments. Wealthy, humble, tall, or lean, men of all kinds were eager to offer her their hearts. At work, her brilliance shone. A new treatment approach for bronchitis she'd proposed yielded remarkable results, earning her admiration among colleagues. One day, her supervisor suggested she apply for a PhD program at her alma mater. The idea ignited a spark of inspiration she hadn't felt in years. She began preparing for the exams, scheduled for the following spring, often spending long evenings engrossed in study. Somewhere deep inside, she realized her ambition wasn't entirely her own. A quiet part of her wanted Jake to see how far she'd come, to understand what he had lost. The realization unsettled her. After all, she didn't even know where Jake was or what had become of him. One crisp autumn evening, a colleague invited Hannah to a lively party in the city. Initially reluctant, she decided a change of pace might do her good. The venue buzzed with energy, an eclectic mix of guests swirling about. Older men huddled in groups, trading gossip, while socialites showcased glittering outfits and jewelry, moving like actors in a play. Hannah navigated the room with a glass of wine, lingering by the hors d'oeuvres table and watching the crowd. She was just about to leave when a young man standing alone caught her eye. His clothes were plain, inexpensive, and his demeanor quiet, almost reserved. Yet there was something about him, an authenticity, that set him apart from the crowd of posturing elites. "What you like what you see," a familiar voice teased at her ear. Startled, Hannah turned to find Michelle, an old acquaintance, grinning mischievously. "That's Daniel, my neighbor," Michelle continued, sipping champagne. "I only dragged him here because Greg bailed on me. He's sweet but not my type." Michelle winked. "Feel free to take him off my hands. I don't mind sharing." Hannah rolled her eyes, brushing off the comment. "Don't talk nonsense," she muttered, turning toward the exit. As she descended the grand marble staircase, her heels slipped. Arms flailing, she felt the panic of weightlessness. But before she could fall, strong hands caught her, steadying her firmly. "Are you all right?" a gentle baritone asked. Hannah looked up to see Daniel, concern etched across his face. "Thank you," she stammered, heart racing. "If it weren't for you, I'd have broken my neck." Daniel smiled modestly. "Glad I could help. I left the party right after you did. It's getting late." They exchanged a few more words before Hannah offered him a ride home, but he politely declined. "I live nearby. I'll walk," he said with a small shrug. The next day, Daniel appeared at the hospital after her shift, holding a single white rose. Blushing, he admitted, "Michelle told me where to find you." Charmed by his old-fashioned sincerity, Hannah found herself saying yes when he shyly asked her out to a movie. Over the following months, Hannah and Daniel grew closer. His courtship was simple, almost quaint, but it warmed her in ways she hadn't expected. He was kind, dependable, and deeply attentive, the type of man who radiated strength without arrogance. When they walked together, other women cast longing glances, sensing the depth of his devotion. But despite his unwavering affection, Hannah grappled with a truth she couldn't escape. She didn't love him. She cared for him, appreciated his warmth, and even felt attached to him. But her heart remained untouched. Yet she couldn't bring herself to confess, fearing the pain it would cause. In March, Daniel proposed. By May, they were married. A year later, they welcomed a baby boy, Justin. Motherhood changed Hannah in ways she hadn't anticipated. Justin was born frail, but her love for him was fierce and boundless. She poured her entire heart into nurturing him, marveling at the depth of a mother's love. Daniel was a devoted father, taking on late-night feedings, running errands, and cherishing every moment with his son. Justin quickly grew into a lively toddler, his sandy brown hair and piercing blue eyes mirroring his father's. Hannah adored her little boy, though she sometimes felt a pang of jealousy at the special bond between father and son. But she reassured herself, they're men. They have their own connection. While raising Justin, Hannah pursued her PhD on a part-time basis. Life seemed stable, even content. Yet deep inside, she knew she was living on a carefully maintained surface. The love she had once dreamed of, the passion that had consumed her for Jake, was absent. One evening, while Daniel and Justin were out for a walk, Hannah's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. It was 7:30 p.m., and they hadn't returned yet. Answering absent-mindedly, she froze at the sound of the voice on the other end. Hannah, it said. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Jake. I'm in town, he said, his voice low and familiar. Staying at a hotel. Can you come? Yes, she whispered before she could think, already scrambling for her coat. A week later, Hannah's father arrived at the home she shared with Daniel to collect her belongings. Avoiding Daniel's gaze, he handed over a short note from Hannah. Daniel, thank you for everything. I'm sorry. She hadn't mentioned Justin. I pressed the intercom button, my heart pounding in my chest. Yes? Who is it? A woman's voice crackled through the speaker. I'm here to see Hannah. Is she home? I said, trying to steady my voice. Nervousness tightened my throat. And how should I announce you? Just say, I'm an old friend. Moments later, the gate creaked open, and an older man dressed in a crisp black suit stepped out. His eyes flicked briefly to the sleek German car, parked by the curb, before motioning for me to follow. Come to the house. They'll meet you inside. As I approached the grand entrance, the door swung open before I could knock. A young woman, dressed in a maid's apron, stood waiting. Please come in, she said briskly. Wait in the living room. The lady of the house will be down shortly. I stepped inside, taking in the polished floors and tasteful decor. Time seemed to slow as I stood there, trying to collect myself. Then, the sound of soft footsteps broke the silence. A trim, middle-aged woman entered the room. She wore a flowing cream blouse and a tailored skirt that accentuated her effortless grace. Her blonde hair was meticulously styled, and her tan complexion radiated the kind of refinement that spoke of years of careful upkeep. Hello, she greeted me with a polite nod, her tone cool yet courteous. How can I help you? I didn't answer. I couldn't. I simply stared, my breath catching in my throat. She tilted her head, studying me with mild confusion. There must be some mistake, she said, her smile uneasy but still composed. I was told you're an old friend, but I'm certain we've never met. Who are you? My voice came out hoarse and trembling. Mom, you don't recognize me? Her expression froze. The composure she wore so well cracked as her eyes widened in shock. She staggered slightly, clutching the back of a chair for support. Justin, she whispered, her voice breaking. After all these years. Tears brimmed in her eyes as the carefully constructed facade fell away. Her hands trembled as she gripped the chair. I never thought I'd see you again, she murmured, struggling to hold herself together. I felt a mix of anger and sorrow bubble up inside me, words tumbling out before I could stop them. I get it, Mom. Love swept you away. There was no time to remember the little kid you left behind. My voice shook with pain, each word heavier than the last. Don't say that. You don't know the whole story. Her face flushed, and her tears began to spill freely. I don't need your excuses, I said, my throat tightening as emotions threatened to overwhelm me. You know, Mom, I always hoped I'd see you again. But not for closure, not for answers. Just to remember. Just to see you, so I could remind myself that I once had a mother. That's all. Her tears streaked down her face as she whispered, Justin, please. But I shook my head, my voice thick with emotion. That's all, Mom. That's all you and I need. Goodbye. As I turned and walked out, I heard her footsteps following me to the gate. Justin, she cried, her voice desperate. I glanced back briefly to see her standing in the doorway, her hands pressed to her chest. Her expression was raw, pleading. But I couldn't stay. I climbed into the Porsche and slammed the door shut. The car purred to life. And as I drove away, the house disappeared behind me, swallowed by the bend in the road. The bitter truth of calculated love. People often claim that a marriage founded on calculation is more resilient than one built solely on love. The logic seems sound. Reason over passion, compatibility over fleeting emotions. But beneath the surface lies a truth too bitter to ignore. Men, when they propose, usually do so with love in their hearts. It's a necessity, an instinct to win, to fight for the woman they adore. Women, however, are often praised for their pragmatism, able to agree to a union without the spark of love. And this is where the seeds of trouble are sown. When a woman marries without love, she unknowingly taps into a man's emotional reserves, drawing from his need to earn her devotion. But a man's emotional endurance is not infinite. Over time, unreciprocated affection drains him, leaving him with two choices. 1. Seek real, mutual love elsewhere. 2. Surrender, becoming a shadow of himself, a doormat. Neither option bodes well. If he strays, he's branded unfaithful. If he stays, he's perceived as weak. Either way, the marriage begins to crumble. And for the woman, dissatisfaction grows. Doubts creep in, whispered by an old flame, or a charming new suitor who reignites her longing for passion. In her pursuit of happiness, the cost is rarely weighed. When a woman chooses to leave for another man, she often justifies it as self-discovery, believing it's for the best. But what about the children left behind? A mother's love may be fierce, but no stranger, no new partner, can truly replace a child's father. This story, at first glance, seems to position Hannah as the protagonist, a woman caught in the crosswinds of life's trials. But as the narrative unfolds, the perspective shifts. It's not Hannah's life that is truly shattered, nor her husband Daniel's. The real victim is Justin, the child left behind. This thought-provoking story challenges our understanding of love, marriage, and the consequences of selfish choices. What do you think? Share your thoughts below.